Hi, my name is Dale Maley, and in this video today I'm going to explain how to make a circa 1909 Mission Style Fern Table. And this plan came from a book that was published back in 1980 by Popular Mechanics about mission furniture and how to make it. And it covers the years 1909 to 1912. And it's really an excellent book, and the plans are actually very well done. And I've made many different items beside the fern table using the plans from this book. So from page 241 from this book starts the plans for the fern stand. And here's the actual page, but it's hard to read, so we'll focus on the bottom half here in a second. Now here's a closer shot of that first page of the plan. And it starts out saying they recommend using quarter sawed oak if possible, but that's very hard to get. And the tables I've made, I did not use quarter sawn oak. I've used red oak and white oak. Anyway, it tells you what size of boards to get for the project, and then it starts out by saying start making the four legs first. Now here's the third page of the plans from the book, and as you can see, they actually give you a drawing, two views, and show you the critical dimensions for building the fern stand. And here's the last page in the book for the plans for the fern stand, and they actually show you a photograph of the finished stand, and you can also tell that it was done in quarter sawn oak as well. Now I use a computer program called SketchUp for all my woodworking projects. So using the dimensions and drawings in the old book, I redrew it in SketchUp. And here's what it looks like in the SketchUp drafting program. One key thing when you're making any table is you want the four legs to be exactly the same length so the table doesn't wobble when it's sitting on a flat surface. So what I normally do, I take my saw and I set up a temporary stop system, as you can see here. And then I put all the boards in, so when you saw, everyone in theory should be exactly the same length. Now anytime you use the table saw to cut 1.5 inch oak, you're probably going to end up with burn marks on the wood. And it's very time consuming to have to sand those burn marks out. So I knew that ahead of time, so what I did here was when I ripped the boards on the table saw, I made them slightly oversized with a plan of taking them to my planer and then planing them down to finished size, and also have no burn marks because the planer removed the burn marks from the saw. Worked very nicely. Now the interesting thing about woodworking as a hobby is there are many different ways to shape the pieces to get your final result. So for example, you have to put mortises in the legs. So you could use the old-fashioned way with a hammer and chisel. You could use a drill press attachment, or you might have a special mortising machine. So when I made these tables, I used a drill press attachment as shown in the photo. A few years later, I actually purchased a dedicated mortising machine, which is actually much easier than setting up the drill press, but it got me by. Now you also have to make some tenons on this project to fit into those mortises we made in the previous step, and there's alternative methods for making the tenons. I do have a special tenon fixture shown here in blue on my table saw to let me cut tenons. You can also cut them with a handsaw, and there's probably other ways to do it as well. Once I got the main pieces made for the frame itself, I like to do a dry fit with no glue, just to make sure everything fits and looks okay. So here's a photo of when I was doing a dry fit of all the main frame parts. Now the next step in this project of making a fern table was to make the diamond panels that go around the outer perimeter. And you can see one here on my scroll saw, and I used my scroll saw to cut those out. Once I got all the diamond panels made, I again did a dry fit to make sure everything still fits okay, as shown in this photograph. It's pretty much done at this point except for the top piece and the shelf. Now in this project, to make the top and the shelf, I had to glue up smaller boards to make larger boards. So I chose to join those together using the Craig pocket screw method. And you can see the little drilled holes for the Craig pocket screws. That forms the top and the shelf. And then they are never quite lined up, the boards, so I almost always have to belt sand them smooth. So what I do, I take a pencil and I scribe on the joint lines with a pencil, as you can see here. Then take the belt sander and carefully remove material until the pencil marks are gone. Now at this point in the project, we have to make cutouts in 4 corners of both the top and the shelf. So what I learned when I made 2 of these before, the first time I just tried measuring those 4 cutouts, which is very time consuming and not perfectly accurate. What I discovered was if you don't make the 45-degree slope top on the 4 legs, if you wait till later, you can just set the 4 legs on top of the tabletop, then take a pencil and scribe where you want to saw the 4 cutouts. Then I took it to the squirrel saw and I cut out the 4 cutouts. Then you can take the legs to a chop saw and make the 45-degree parts on the very top of the 4 legs. This works much better to use this method. After I got the 4 corners marked with a pencil where to saw them, I took them to the scroll saw, as you can see here. And I experimented, and you want probably the biggest blade that'll fit in your scroll saw because it won't burn, leave burn marks. If you go with a much finer blade, you might have burn marks and it might break the blade. So use a larger blade on your scroll saw. I took a photograph of the table disassembled with the parts on my concrete shop floor. As you can see, there's quite a few parts that go into making one of these fern tables. This photograph kind of shows the final dry fit that I did with all the parts to make sure everything fits okay. And then my next step was to stain everything, because I stained the parts separately, and then I glued and clamped up the final assembly. Here's a photo showing all the parts that have all been completing the stain process step here. They're drying here. Now the oak family is relatively porous wood, and if you stain it and then put say even 3 coats of polyurethane, it's still not going to be a mirror finish on your tabletop or your shelf. And you can do that, and if you're okay with that look, that's fine. If you want to have a really mirror finish, what you can do is use something called Balin's grain filler. And I used that on this project. So I sanded everything to 220 grit, then gave it a first coat of stain. Then you hand rub in the Balin's grain filler, and then you let it dry, only for about 10 minutes. Then you scrape off the excess, then you let it completely dry, and then stain it again. And then you can start putting your cycles of polyurethane, a light 220 sanding, another coat of polyurethane. And as you'll see in the photographs, you really end up with a beautiful mirror finish by doing this extra steps. Now in this photograph, I've stained the wood the first time, let it dry. Then I rubbed in the Balin's grain filler, let it set about 10 minutes, and then I scraped the excessive amount off with a plastic scraper. Now what you see here is what remains after you scrape it. That's the kind of white powder that you can see on the oak. After that completely dries, then you sand it again to 220 grit, and you can finish up the process similar to the steps I had on the other page. Now from a design perspective, you need to allow a way for the top to expand and contract with changes in temperature and humidity. If you solidly attach that to the frame, something's eventually going to break. And what probably usually would happen is your tabletop will split. So one way to handle this is to saw grooves in your side pieces and then use some tabletop fasteners. I got these from Rockler, but many places sell them. And those little steel tabs then fit in the sawn grooves, and you leave some clearance when you put them together. That way the tabletop can expand and contract and it won't bother the frame at all. Here's basically the last step in the process. All the parts have been finished, and now it's time to glue and clamp everything together. And I use Titebond 2 glue on this, and then I have a wet shop rag, and I carefully wipe off any excess glue that comes out from the joints. Now here's a photograph of the finished project. In this case I made 2 of the fern tables, and the coffee cup is for scale. However, you should be able to see the reflection of the coffee cup in the tabletop because of the mirror finish I got using the Behlen's grain filler. Some closing thoughts on this project. I think these make very nice looking small tables, and they're small or medium sized tables. And I really like the circa 1909 Mission Style design, the look of it. And I like the diamond panels as well. So in summary, this short video explains how to build a circa 1909 Mission Style Fern Table. Hopefully it gives you some ideas on how to do this project, or maybe it gives you some ideas for some of your related projects. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.